Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We're so happy that you are here with us today. We know that you can be anywhere, but you are here with us to learn more about our LIHTC program. And this webinar is really provided for you to know your rights. You're going to be listening to residents. You're going to be listening to how you can advocate for yourselves and the folks around you. I'm Karina Petty. My pronouns are she, her. I'm Power Building Director at Housing California. I'm going to pass it over to Alexa to talk through interpretation.
Thank you. Entonces, hola, nada más decíamos muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a este seminario web y bienvenidos para aprender más acerca de sus derechos. Ahora voy a hacer nada más una súper breve, nada más instrucciones sobre cómo podemos llegar a los canales de idioma. So, yes, hi everybody. Today we have ASL and Spanish interpretation available for this webinar today. So, if you would like to listen in another language, I will explain to you in just a second because the Zoom tool is not active yet. Entonces, el seminario de hoy está disponible tanto en inglés como en español como en lengua norteamericana de señas. Entonces, les voy a explicar ahorita cómo es que pueden llegar a sus canales. Eh, si estamos en una tableta o en un teléfono, vamos a ir a la parte de abajo y también igual en una computadora deben de ver un icono que está en forma de globito. Entonces ahí le dan clic en la parte de abajo a la derecha, va a estar ya sea en donde está el círculo con los tres puntitos, ahí le dan clic y seleccionan su canal, que en este caso es el español. Eh, También pueden silenciar el audio original si de repente como que les molesta, les causa un poco de ruido estar escuchando las dos voces al mismo tiempo. Y si tienen algún problema con la interpretación, nos pueden hacer saber en la cajita del chat para poderles ayudar y vamos a comenzar a interpretar justo después de que termine yo de dar esas instrucciones. So I am just explaining how to get to the channels. You can go to the bottom right where there's a circle and it says more. Then you click language interpretation and then you select your channel. And if there's any issues, please let us know in the chat and we can help you. And I will also be dropping the instructions in the chat for folks who need it there. So I will start interpreting right after we are done with this, which is going to be very, very soon. And I think, Serafina, you can assign me now. So let's get to the channels. And also, if there's issues, let me know in the chat. Y si no escuchan por cualquier cosa, me pueden avisar en el chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexa. We appreciate you so much. As I mentioned, folks, we are really here today to give you all the opportunity to learn about tenant protection and low-income housing tax credit housing, hear directly from resident leaders about how organizing is creating change in their communities, and really explore how we can, continue to build resident power together. Whether you're a resident, advocate, organizer, or affordable housing partner, we're just super grateful that you're here with us, and you hope we leave you feeling informed, connected, and inspired. I'm going to pass it over to William Goodwin, who is an amazing resident leader with Resident United Network, who's going to ground us in today. William, I'm passing it over to you.
Thank you, Karina. Hello, everyone. My name is William Goodwin. We do appreciate you joining us tonight in this discussion about new tenant protections and low-income housing tax credit, better known as LIHTC, and how residents can use these tools to strengthen their communities. I want to acknowledge that we recognize there has been some growing tensions between LIHTC property owners and tenants who live in LIHTC properties. So what we wanted to do is address those tensions head on, but in a way that is constructive. I happen to live in a LIHTC affordable housing unit, and I love my affordable unit. I know that as a single father, if we didn't have housing that is affordable, I could not have raised my daughter and given her the opportunity to attend and now graduate from college. But I am not naive. I understand that not everyone shares my experience in LIHTC properties and that not all LIHTC property owners are mission driven and that some seek profit over personhood and answer to their shareholders rather than stakeholders. As a member of Resident United Network, we believe it is not unreasonable for a tenant to want and expect decent, clean, and dignified housing that is responsive to the needs of rent-paying tenants. And I know that mission-driven affordable housing developers work endlessly to provide housing that is beautiful, affordable, and maintained to a standard that is higher than most. I know this because I am a member of the board of directors of RCD, Residents for Community Development, an affordable housing developer and a LIHTC property owner. Here's the thing. LIHTC property is the primary tool we have to finance affordable housing. Is the LIHTC program perfect? No. No, rents are too high for an average family of four living under the poverty line. But we need additional subsidies to make LIHTC units more affordable. And that's why residents must be allowed to organize for the rights of tenants. But that doesn't mean we raise our pitchforks or draw a line in the sand for either party, but rather it means we raise our consciousness and draw on our collective wisdom and solidarity to improve the rules and regulations that govern LIHTC properties. That's why we're here today, to speak to that tension. We know that LIHTC properties are super important in affordable housing developments and that some property owners are better than others. And sometimes there are issues that arise for tenants living in these units. So in a very constructive and collaborative way, we are trying to address the need to improve the deficiencies in the program. And the only way we do that is by working together and again, in solidarity, because we need both more affordable housing and for the housing to be dignified and truly affordable. You know, both things can live in the same universe, and we cannot accept a false choice of one or the other. It can be done, and residents living in affordable housing need to be the ones driving this effort. Through organizing, we can and have made real changes, like, for example, the new TCAT complaint system. Resident voices can make a huge difference in this discussion because we're closer to the issue than anyone. Our stories, our experiences can speak truth to power. With that, I would like to introduce Francisco Duenas, Executive Director for Housing Now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am speaking a little bit slower, just so that way our interpreters have the capacity, are able to follow along and interpret everything we are saying. But I mostly just wanted to thank our coalition partners and co-hosts for today, including RUN, the Residents United Network, Urban Habitat, the National Housing Law Project, Disability Rights California, Housing California, and Movement Legal, Western Center on Law and Poverty. As you can see, there's quite a number of us coming together to, as William said, be able to bring this goal of dignified, affordable housing for everybody forward. And so I'm just going to ask if you have yet to put your name and where you're living in the chat for us. And how long have you been a housing justice champion? Please introduce yourselves. We want to welcome everybody. And after maybe 1 or 2 minutes, I'm going to invite our colleague, Marco Segura from the National Housing Law Project to kick us off with some of the information we wanted to update everybody around. Thanks so much, everybody. Marcos, take it away.
So I'll give folks a couple of minutes to put their information in the chat. But just as you're doing that, my name is Marco Segura. I am a staff attorney with the National Housing Law Project. I'm based out of Fresno, California. For those of you that are not familiar with the National Housing Law Project, we're an organization that advocates for the expansion and improvement of the federal affordable housing programs. So LIHTC being one of them, but also the various HUD Section 8 programs, the USDA's rural housing program, and so on. And we do that through either policy or a combination of policy and litigation. We're based out of San Francisco, but I personally am headquartered in Fresno, California, which is where I grew up, or near where I grew up. So type away in the chat, and I'm gonna try to. I'm very technologically incompetent, so see if I can share this without a glitch here. Share my screen without a glitch.
Marcos, you're on mute.
Can you all see my screen? PowerPoint presentation? Okay. I'm gonna be
Yes.
off camera because I did not print my notes out, and so I have to like turn sideways to read them. So, but you're not missing anything special. It's the information that matters. So hopefully everyone got their information into the chat. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So the primary purpose of this presentation, my portion of the presentation, was to discuss recent wins in the LIHTC space in California in the form of tenant protections that everyone should know about. But I think in doing that, I think it's helpful to kind of talk about the program, how it works, talk about some of the gaps in the program so folks have some context as to why advocates were advocating for some of these changes. And then talk about, um, there's a lot left to be done, and briefly mention or talk about how folks can get involved and pursue changes themselves, either individually or collectively with your neighbors, with your light tech neighbors. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Starting with what is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC? It is a federal housing program administered by the U.S. Treasury Department, specifically the IRS. So it's not administered by HUD or the USDA. Unlike other federal housing programs, the LIHTC program does not provide rental assistance or involve any direct government payment, for example, like a grant or subsidized loan. Instead, the program offers tax benefits in the form of tax credits that investors use to reduce their tax bill in exchange for their investment in what is considered affordable housing. These tax credits and other real estate tax deductions that LIHTC owners receive are extremely valuable. The value of these credits, along with reduced investments in other federal housing programs like public housing, project-based Section 8, has made the LIHTC program the primary vehicle for the financing and construction, or for financing the construction or rehabilitation of affordable housing. The program was significantly expanded by the Big Beautiful Bill passed last year, which raised the annual federal cost of the program to about $15 billion per year. So how does the program work? The IRS issues tax credits to every single state based on population. As the most populous state, California gets the most tax credits. In California, credits go to what's called the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, or TCAC, which is responsible for administering the program at the state level. TCAC falls within the state treasurer's office, which is an elected office, an elected position. So you can vote for the person that's ultimately in charge of this program at the state level. TCAC then awards these credits to developers through a competitive application process. After credits are awarded to a developer, that developer sells the credits to investors. For those that are curious, credits are typically bought by financial institutions like banks and insurance companies, which tend to have huge tax bills. The money that's raised from the sale is then used by the developer to pay for the cost of constructing or rehabilitating the proposed LIHTC project. In exchange for the credits and the money that they produce, the owners of the LIHTC project, which at this point include both the developer and the investor. They own the property together as a partnership. Those owners must keep rents restricted in accordance with program rules. Most LIHTC developers are for-profit entities, not mission-driven nonprofit organizations. The LIHTC program does a great job of incentivizing private investment in federal housing policy, which is, what kind of sets it apart from other federal housing programs. However, the program can be strengthened in at least two ways. One is by improving affordability, making rents more affordable, and the other is by creating stronger tenant protections or tenants' rights. So we'll start with affordability. Again, this is just to give folks some context as to why advocates were pushing for changes, some of the changes that were achieved, and also what else tenants could advocate for in the future. So starting with affordability, any conversation about LIHTC affordability has to start with how rents are calculated, which is kind of convoluted, a little confusing, but I'm going to do my best to kind of try to lay it out in a straightforward way. So unlike in other federal housing programs, LIHTC rent is not based on household income. Instead, what the LIHTC rules do is they establish a limit on the amount of rent that an owner can charge. This is commonly known as the max or maximum LIHTC rent. So specifically, an owner cannot charge more than 30% of the income limitation assigned to a unit. So what is the income limitation? This income limitation is expressed as a percentage of area median income, or AMI, and it ranges from 20% to 80% of AMI. The income limitation is assigned to each unit by the project's owner at the very beginning of the project. And it has two purposes. One is to determine eligibility. Specifically, the income limitation caps the income a household can earn to be eligible to occupy a LIHTC unit. So for example, to occupy a unit with an income limitation of 50% of AMI, the household income must be at or below 50% of AMI. The other purpose of the income limitation is, as I mentioned, to set the max LIHTC rent. The idea behind max LIHTC rent is that a household with an income that is at or below their unit's income limitation should be able to afford that unit. But that's not always the case. And so why is that? The majority of LIHTC tenants, a little under 54%, are extremely low income, meaning that they have incomes at or below 30% of AMI. Yet most LIHTC units have an income limitation of 50% or 60% of AMI. Because units at 50 or 60% of AMI are meant to be affordable to households making 50 or 60% of AMI, that means that most LIHTC units are unaffordable to the majority of LIHTC tenants, which again, only earn 30% or less of AMI. Because of that, just under 40% of LIHTC tenants are rent burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income toward rent. A significant portion of LIHTC tenants do pay 30% or less of their income toward rent, so they live in affordable units. However, based on HUD data, this is likely because these households receive a rental subsidy of some sort, a Section 8 voucher. The property might have project-based Section 8 vouchers, things of that nature. So what this does is it highlights that LIHTC struggles on its own to produce deeply affordable housing, again, as a standalone program. LIHTC rent can even be a challenge even for households with incomes between 50 and 60% of AMI. That's about 20% of all California LIHTC households. And that's because LIHTC rents are based on area median income, which reflect the incomes of both the low-income LIHTC tenants in the area and also financially better off households in that same area. And that tends to skew rents upward. So you don't have to memorize all the stats that I just rattled off. That was just for the purpose of making the basic point that LIHTC does not produce truly affordable housing on its own, but rather it generally produces housing that is below market, which may or may not be affordable to the low-income tenants the program is intended to serve. And in some jurisdictions, LIHTC rents can even exceed market rates. In the slide, I included a link to an article, a recent article from ProPublica, talking about the Portland rental market and discussing how that's just a microcosm of the broader LIHTC affordability issue. But again, this is just assuming that LIHTC is the only program that applies to a property. With a subsidy, LIHTC rents can be affordable. Um, Turning to tenants' rights, the point of affordable housing isn't just about making rents more affordable. It's also about ensuring that tenants keep their housing, their affordable housing, for the long term. In other words, it's also about housing stability. Other federal housing programs provide housing stability and fairness through a slate of strong tenant protections, including things like good cost to evict, that requires intentional culpable conduct, fair lease provisions, standard occupancy rules. They require an explanation of admissions denials to identify discrimination. They impose limits on late fees. They have extended grace periods for payment of rent, and they typically have a grievance process to resolve landlord-tenant issues before an eviction can be filed. None of these protections exist under federal LIHTC rules. So we're talking about the federal rules, not necessarily the state rules. Federal LIHTC rules do require good cause to evict, but the term good cause is not defined, which leaves it up to a judge to decide what constitutes good cause on a case-by-case basis. And that sometimes leads to arbitrary and unfair evictions. But there's good news, and that is that the program can be improved to make it more affordable and to create stronger tenant protections. As William touched on, improving the program to better serve tenants should be a shared goal of tenants and housing providers, particularly mission-driven housing providers. So the effort to improve the program should be a collaborative effort between tenants, tenant advocates, housing providers, and other industry stakeholders. So how do you do this? So one option is, get federal legislation passed, but federal fixes are very unlikely because of the gridlock in Washington, right? Which we know all too well. But as mentioned, it is the individual states that implement the program on the ground. And because of this, states have a lot of power to enact LIHTC rules that serve tenants. And they do this through two primary pathways. One is through legislation, and the other is through updates to the state's qualified allocation plan, or QAP or QAP. I call it the QAP. So the QAP is a federally required document that governs how a state will administer the LIHTC program at the state level. Under federal law, the QAP must reflect the state's housing priorities and advance the goal of serving the lowest income tenants for the longest period possible. This is a very broad mandate that gives states a lot of discretion to create state-specific rules, provided that they don't conflict with federal requirements. That's really the only limitation. Briefly, in California, the QAP is updated about once per year, sometimes a couple of times per year, but generally one time per year. Proposed changes are typically published in November and adopted in December. But note that TCAC considers QAP update proposals throughout the year. And TCAC does not formally request public input, but members of the public, including LIHTC tenants, can submit proposals directly to the agency for consideration at any point. So we've recently seen some major improvements to the program in California, both through legislation and the QAP update process. On the legislative side, in 2024, the state legislature passed a law directing TCAC to establish a cap on annual rent increases at LIHTC properties. Once the bill was passed, TCAG subsequently adopted a rent cap that is the lesser of 5% plus inflation, or 10%. So it's the same rent cap as the Tenant Protection Act, which some of you may have heard about. There are a few automatic exceptions to this cap that do not require TCAG approval. And for those for a rent increase that doesn't fall within those exceptions, owners can request a waiver of the cap if they can show that it is necessary to ensure that the project's financial viability, that tenants will not be rent burden, and the owner has to show that the project's poor financial condition was not caused by owner mismanagement. So advocates work with TCAC to ensure that the waiver process consider the impact on tenants and to ensure that poor management decisions are not borne out by the tenants themselves. A little bit more on this rent increase limitation or rent cap. Owners must provide notice to tenants of the owner's intent to request a rent cap waiver. The notice must contain the amount being requested and explain the owner's reason for requesting the waiver. And the notice must inform tenants of the right to submit comments to TCAC about the proposed rent increase. So tenants have a say in this process. If a waiver is approved and the rent increase is more than 10%, tenants are still entitled to 90 days notice before the rent increase can go into effect. So, with the notice to the tenants about the request, it takes a little while for TCAC to consider the waiver and process it, plus the additional 90 days. It gives, sort of built into the law is this very long sort of notice period that gives tenants a little bit of time to adjust in case they're going to get a rent increase of more than 10%. All of this information about the TCAC rent cap and the waiver process is in the memo that is linked in the slide. On the QAP update side of things, advocates have used the QAP process to push for stronger tenant protections. This resulted in TCAC adopting a slate of fair housing regulations that require every LIHTC property to have a written non-discrimination policy that goes beyond the standard protected class characteristics. So the standard is religion, race, ethnicity, and so on. But this includes things like gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, source of income, citizenship, primary language, immigration status, and criminal history. Owners are also required to have a written tenant selection plan that is clear so that applicants know the minimum requirements for admission before they apply. They're required to have a reasonable accommodation policy for the provision, including for the provision of auxiliary aids and services for effective communication with residents and applicants with disabilities, a policy allowing service animals as a matter of right, and what I consider to be the most important in that it's the most protective or protects the most against evictions is a written tenant grievance and appeal procedure to challenge adverse landlord actions and adverse admissions denials. Um, these new rules do need to be refined a little bit to clarify landlord-tenant obligations, rights and obligations, but they represent a huge step forward toward achieving more protective, more stable housing for tenants. Most recently, TCAC created a tenant resource page that clearly defines what issues TCAC can assist with, what issues TCAC cannot help with, along with resources for tenants to direct their question to the right organization or agency. And it includes an email where tenants can lodge complaints. So going back to the fair housing regulations in the previous slide, this resource page allows tenants to reach out to TCAC about owner noncompliance with these fair housing obligations and other program requirements. It's a great way to ensure that these rules are being implemented. So we strongly encourage tenants to make use of this resource. Again, there's a link to the resource page on the slide. The tenant resource website was launched in April, so we don't have a good sense of how it's working. But again, we encourage people to use it so that we have some information, some data, so we can assess the efficacy of the resource. But again, this is yet another step in the right direction by TCAC toward more tenant-centered policies that we've been pushing for quite a bit. And so that's sort of the long and the short of, how you advocate for change, what changes, what wins have been achieved, um, sort of at the statewide level. There's also an opportunity at the local level to achieve, better tenant protections or greater affordability. Cities and counties can pass ordinances touching on these issues, again, provided they don't conflict with federal or state law. And we're going to hear from some folks later on that have, kind of taken advantage of that and achieved some great wins at the local level on the LIHTC front. And so that does it for my presentation. And I think our Q&A starts now. I haven't been keeping up with the chat. But I encourage folks to come off mute and ask their questions if you put it in the chat. I'm a slow reader, so it might take a while if I have to go through the chat.
Yes, Marcos, I can help with that. I think Francisco's still driving
Yep.
some of the questions that have already come through. So, um, one of the first questions, so where can LIHTC residents go for legal consultation or advice and possible legal assistance when there is potential mistreatment or neglect of habitability rules by the property owner?
So I think the first thing to do in that situation is to make use of this tenant resource page in the complaint system, because things like habitability, that is like very much within the scope of what TCAC, the state agency that runs the program. It's well within its scope in terms of like its authority to enforce, and impose fees, and just overall take enforcement action. So you want to start there. And if for whatever reason TCAC does not get involved or the issue is not resolved, the best resource for legal advice, legal assistance would be your local legal aid provider. There's an LSC website where you can just punch in your zip code and it'll pop up the legal aid organization for your county. And typically, it's based on income, but if you qualify, legal advice, legal assistance is free of charge.
Great, thank you. The next question was, do LIHTC tax credits expire?
Yes, they do. So it used to be the case. So this program started in 1986. And initially, owners just had to agree to keep affordability restrictions and comply with program rules for only 30 years. And I think, and so again, going back to like states being able to create their own rules, California, I think in the early 2000s, imposed a minimum 55-year affordability restriction. So, yes, LIHTC affordability restrictions expire, but in California, you're talking, over half a century after the project has gone into service. There are still some projects out there from, pre 2002, 2003 that are kind of reaching the end of their affordability period. And so it's hard to track those. It's hard to get a sense of how many of those projects are out there. So if you live in one of those projects, we want to know about it, because one of the issues with that is there is no soft landing for tenants. Once the affordability restriction expires, the owner does not have to do anything, doesn't have to comply with any sort of decontrol period or anything of the sort. They just have to give you the proper notice for a rent increase, and they can increase rents to the market rate. So again, if you're in one of those projects that is, about to expire, definitely reach out to somebody. The National Housing Law Project would love to hear from you, just to kind of, loop in local advocates to kind of help you through that.
Thank you. The next question that was in the chat is, what assets are usually considered and or exempt during the annual recertification in a LIHTC property?
So HUD doesn't administer the program. It's like I said, it's an IRS program, but the IRS uses the same HUD rules in terms of calculating assets and income. And I don't know those by heart, but I would look at there's a HUD handbook that it's like hundreds of pages, but it has all of the rules there about, what counts as income, what's an asset, that sort of stuff. Um, Generally speaking, the general rule is if it's a source of income, a source of money that you don't have access to right now, that's typically considered an asset and not counted or considered income, while everything that you have access to now, that is, not restricted in some way, counts as household income. That's kind of the general rule. But again, I would direct you to that HUD handbook to, parse through the details of all those rules.
Thank you. All these questions. We have two more that were in the chat. So the first, does the waiver for the rent cap process have to include all three considerations? So going back to what you were saying about the rent cap.
Yeah, so the three, rent burden, mismanagement of by the owner, that sort of stuff. That has to be considered. Um, the process is in public, right? And you don't get some sort of explanation from it. The decision is made by TCAC's executive director. And so all we have is sort of like what this person considers in considering a waiver. And, just based on that, like all of those things that I mentioned have to be part of the consideration. Which one of those things outweighed the other, which one, was the determinative factor. We won't know that because there is no written explanation of the decision. All I can say is you have an opportunity in those situations to comment. And so if you feel like a rent increase of, more than 10% is going to affect the affordability of your unit, or there's, to your knowledge, owner mismanagement or something along those lines, something within the scope of what's considered, I encourage you to submit your comments so that, you sort of highlight the tenant's perspective for the executive director.
Thank you. And I'm reading the questions in the chat, but also if anybody wants to use the raise hand function in the chat or just raise your hand, you can also ask your question that way. But we have two that are related that just came in. First, how do you find out what AMI is on your apartment? What AMI the owner is using for your apartment? And then what happens if you're in 60% AMI housing, I'm assuming, and you lose a big chunk of your income? What happens if your income decreases?
So in terms of figuring out the income limitation, right, which percentage of AMI is assigned to your unit, um, that's one of the issues with the program is that information is not like accessible, right? So you can ask your landlord or the property owner because they have to know, right? Because they have to know what the max rent is. But if they don't give you that information, the other option is to look at what's known as the project's regulatory agreement, which is just a document it's a contract between the state housing agency that gives them the credits and the owner. It's at your local recorder's office. Um, it'll show sort of like how many units are LIHTC units within the project and sort of the proportion of units at a specific income limitation. So in other words, 30% of the units are at 60% of AMI, 40% of the units are at 20% of AMI. And so you'll have a sense of like, what the AMI is, but it won't tell you the AMI or the income limitation for your specific unit. So you either have to get it from your landlord or TCAC may be willing to give you that information because they'll know in detail like which units have which income limitations. And so this is one of the things that we've been pushing for as advocates is requiring the owner to at least annually give a written notice just explaining to tenants or telling tenants what the income limitation is for their unit. Now, to the other question about what happens if you're at a 60% unit and you lose income, again, that's one of the issues with the LIHTC program. Your rent is not based on your income, so your rent is not going to change based on a loss of income, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. Again, if folks have more questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. There were also a number of questions that came in when folks registered. So I do want to um, highlight just one that I think is probably on many people's minds, which is how do changes in national immigration law affect LIHTC residents, and kind of how does LIHTC housing serve folks with mixed immigration status?
So, for reasons I won't disclose, I don't want to get too into dwell too much on the immigration question. Um, the sort of the basic point, the takeaway with LIHTC is that it doesn't have any immigration or citizenship requirements. So, you know, if you have an owner asking for proof of citizenship or anything of the sort, that's improper because TCAC, or excuse me, LIHTC does not have any citizenship requirement or require you to be a qualified alien or anything of the sort. Um, so all these other, these rules that are being proposed by the Trump administration, rescinding the mixed status rule, for example, and things of that sort, do not affect LIHTC tenancies at all.
Great. Thank you. And I see, Scott, you have your hand raised. If you want to go off mute, ask your question.
Um, this is deeply concerning. The middleman tax, the program selling tax credits to investors through massive chunk of federal subsidies gets you eaten up by legal, financial, and consulting fees instead of actually going towards construction. The covenant is a problem that they only have to stay affordable for a set period. Then it converts to market rate. It also concentrates poverty. Projects are disproportionately built in lower income, under-resourced neighborhoods rather than high opportunity areas with good schools and jobs. It's also notoriously expensive to build, often causing far more per square foot than comparable private market housing. The AMI flaw, where highly expensive cities like San Francisco or New York is incredibly high, and that only some of the units, the loophole where only some of the units, like 20% of the units, are at 50% AMI or 40% or 60%. It's also deeply concerning. So my question to you is, how can we justify relying on LIHTC as our primary affordable housing tool when its complex structure directs massive funding to financial middlemen, builds units at a premium price in high poverty neighborhoods, and ultimately allows those units to expire back into expensive market rate housing just a few decades later?
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer your question. So everything you said is true. In terms of how you justify it, this is sort of the policy tool that federal lawmakers are relying on for the construction and rehabilitation of affordable housing. Um, what I would say is, um, not enough lawmakers know about these issues or hear about these issues from the tenants. And so I encourage you and other tenants to talk to your neighbors, to, get together and figure out a way to, talk to, write to your congressperson, whoever that may be, your state legislator, and talk about, sort of what you see as the flaws in the program. And I would recommend, with those, in talking about those flaws, also recommend fixes. How do we fix this? How would you like the program to operate? Um, and it could just be, hey, from your perspective, like this, the program is just isn't working out, and that's perfectly fine. But the reality is that this is what we have right now. But it's well within your hand to, again, organize, unite with your fellow neighbors to talk to your lawmakers about how to improve the program. because like I said, everything you said, and yes, that happens. Like it's, um, the developer fees are high. They have to cap them in some cases because they're so high. All of that stuff is true, but again, the decision makers need to hear that, but they need to hear that not from us, but from the tenants themselves.
And I'll just say, I think this is a good segue. So this program is deeply problematic, and we know we need change. We need immediate change for tenants living in situations like folks are sharing in the chat. And we need structural transformative change, like what Marcos is saying, in a reimagining of our housing system at the federal level. And we need to build the power to get there, right? So I think this is a great transition. I think I'll pass it to Karina. We have a few residents in affordable housing who are going to talk about the organizing and power building that they're doing in their buildings.
Yes,
So Karina,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you for all these wonderful questions. We're really excited to invite our resident leaders to talk about their own lived experience. We really believe that, in order to solve these problems, we need the people closest to the issues. So Sky also dropped something in the chat as well. If you're interested to learn more about the RUN, Resident United Network, Marcos talked about talking to your legislator. We do a lot of trainings on that. We bring folks up to the Capitol to talk about that every year. So just put that in the chat, but would love to introduce Margot Gomez from San Diego. She's a steering committee leader, a Residents United leader, and has been with us for quite some time. Margot?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so honored to be here to share my story and give some insight on what we can do to make change. I'm with Resident United Network and also HEAL Network, which is Homeless Education and Advocacy Leadership. So I've been doing this for over 15 years now, and I've been fighting for different policies. I struggled myself finding housing. I was unhoused, and I was honored to get blessed with a Section 8 voucher during the pandemic, but was unable to use it. I lost my opportunity to use it because it was during the pandemic. They had a skeletal staff at the housing network, and my application just sat and expired. And I wasn't afforded the ability to reapply or given extension. I had had extension and extension after extension. So I took it very personal with my daughters and I living beyond our means and paying market rate rent. Um, I started fighting with a legislator in Sacramento to get a bill passed for a registry for Section 8 vouchers. Since I wasn't able to, I wasn't going to be sour. I turned my grapes into wine and started advocating for others so they don't feel the sting that I felt. So what I did was I worked with a legislator, and she and we powerhoused along with her team and her bill. It was so amazing. It was Assembly Bill 1226, wasn't it? Okay, because I'm advocating for so many bills, I jumbled the numbers. So I apologize. So yes, and it passed. So we got that done. So what we did was we organized. I went on so many excursions down to Sacramento to give my story, to give my testament, to support and advocate for her bill, because it meant so much to me, because like I said, I didn't want another family to lose the opportunity, because I don't know if everyone is privy to this, but one voucher passes through 15 to 20 hands each issue before it is used. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it gives accountability. It gives correct input and information. So look for AB 1226. And I just want to thank you for your time and give you my story. I didn't want to go too far because I got only 2 or 3 minutes, but I could tell you a lot. So thank you, everyone, and I'm looking forward to working and championing to help with anybody that needs it.
Thank you so much, Margot. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I always get at all when I hear you sharing your story, and you have been such a great help. You have been such a great leader, and I want folks to feel inspired, right? So if you are a resident and you want to advocate, if you want to, turn grapes into wine, get involved with, Resident United Network so that way we can help you leverage that and use your voice. We also have another amazing speaker, Melissa Page from Housing Now. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and I am a representative of Woodmark Tenants United. And we came about because our housing, essentially, we were told that we were eligible for this low income housing, and then we all moved in, and basically 9 months later they were like, you are not eligible, you all have to move out. And there was about I would say 45 families at the time. Currently we and then so we organized Legal Aid and Sonoma County Tenants Union and North Bay Organizing Project were instrumental in us maintaining our union and having like ideas of where to go next because none of us had done this before. And we won an ordinance at the Sebastopol City Council level that allows deed restricted housing with a certain amount of units that they would have to pay relocation assistance, which is 3 times the average rent in Sonoma County, and that is for the city of Sebastopol. We are currently suing them in federal court as well, and they just dropped an eviction case against us. There's 14 of us still remaining. So that's been a win for us of like now most likely there's potential that they would still try and evict us, but at least we have this sort of time to regroup and re-strengthen the union and get new members and also just create community so that when we do have these struggles, people know where to go. So thanks for letting me share. I'm really honored to be included.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you so much, Margot. We really appreciate you sharing your story, and it's so powerful. And I just think about, our own personal narratives, the stories that we need to share in order to bring more people into the movement. So just thank you all. If you all can give shout out to Melissa and Margot in the chat. We are almost there. It's almost 7 o'clock, y'all. I know dinner is probably calling your name, and we are happy to just say thank you all as we wrap up today. We want to thank our speakers, our partners, and each of you for joining us. We really hope today's conversation gave you a better understanding of the new tenant protection available to residents living in LIHTC properties and reinforce the importance of role residents play in strengthening our affordable housing communities. If you want to drop one word in the chat that you're leaving with today, or tell us one thing that you are going to do after learning all the amazing things that are happening today, drop it in the chat so that way we can see what you all are going to be up to. But before we close, we know that there are a lot of folks that are a part of organizations. So if you have a training coming up, a community meeting, if you have an event, if you have a house party like Deborah, you want to invite us to, we would love to hear about it. Just drop it in the chat before we leave. One of the strengths of this coalition is truly learning from one another and helping amplify those opportunities happening across the state. So again, if you have something going on, let us know. I already put it in the chat. Margot and William are a part of many things, but they're also a part of Residents United Network. RUN is Housing California's statewide network of resident leaders working together to build leadership, strengthen organizing, and advance housing justice around California. If you are interested in getting involved, please complete our interest form. I'll make sure to drop it into the chat. If you don't see your region, simply select the closest one that it is to you. We are trying to expand our network, so maybe that is like your cue to say, I want RUN in the area. But again, this is where you can advocate for yourself like Margot, William, and Melissa has. And then another thing is our link is not live yet, but I'll make sure as we send the follow-up that we have a housingbondcalifornia.org link, which really serves as a resource hub to where you can stay informed about California's affordable housing efforts, access to educational material, and learn about opportunities to stay connected as the work continues. So just appreciate you all and everything that you have done for us. I'm going to drop in this link before we close out. Sorry, I'm looking for my tabs. I have a cool one pager for you all, so that way you can take it with you. Sorry, y'all. If you are like me, you have so many tabs open. Let me go here. And I'm going to drop it here in the chat. Okay, I see Damien in the chat letting us know what you have going on. And there's that one pager. Folks should have access to this. I hope that you're able to have access to this. But last thing, staying connected with us and our partners. Today's webinar would not have been possible through the collaboration of Housing Now, Tenant Together, Residents United Network, National Housing Law Project, Urban Habitat, Public Advocates, Disability Rights of California. And I might be missing one, but I just appreciate you all and hope you stay engaged with us and have a wonderful evening. Talk to you later, y'all.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Margot, again. You did wonderful. Thank you, William, as well. We couldn't do it without you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you. Thank you,
Thank
Deborah,
you.
for
Bye,
hosting a
everyone.
house party. That is such like key to leadership right there. Amazing. Thank you all. See you later. We'll see you soon with some follow-ups.
Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you, Dan.